Hello, welcome to my channel Nick Room. Like and subscribe. Leave the cabin! What are you doing here? The young flight attendant's voice rang out sharply, almost metallic, shattering the silence that reigned inside the jet. The man, tall, dressed in a strict but modest suit, froze in place. His eyes slid over the empty leather seats glimmering under the soft lights, then lingered on the woman in uniform. "Excuse me?" His voice was low and calm, touched with surprise. "I asked what you're doing here," the flight attendant repeated, stepping closer. "This is a private jet. Strangers are not allowed here. Leave immediately or I'll have to call security." The man raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't move. He didn't hurry to explain himself, didn't justify his presence. Inside, emotions were boiling. Irritation, bitterness, humiliation. Outwardly, he showed only cold composure. At that moment, another crew member entered the cabin, a young steward. Seeing the scene, he quickly scanned the man from head to toe. Dark skin, confident posture, expensive suit, but missing the usual signs of an owner. No badge, no entourage. "What's the problem?" he asked the flight attendant. "This man sneaked onto the plane. I'm sure he has no right to be here," she said, without even looking at the man, as if he were invisible. "Sir," the steward addressed him, trying to sound polite. "Perhaps you're mistaken. The aircraft is preparing for departure, and passengers aren't on board yet. You need to leave." The man looked at them both, pausing for a moment. His lips curved into a faint smile, one that carried both pain and irony. "Mistaken?" he repeated quietly. "Yes," the flight attendant cut in, her voice rising. "And the sooner you get off this plane, the better. Otherwise, I'll call airport security." With those words, she reached for the phone on the wall. Just then, another figure entered the cabin, the captain. He stopped, immediately sensing the tense atmosphere. "What's going on here?" his authoritative voice demanded. "This man broke into the plane," the flight attendant quickly explained. "He claims... Actually, no, he doesn't claim anything. He just stands here and stares." The captain turned his eyes to the man. Their gazes met. And in that look, the man saw what he was all too familiar with. Doubt, concealed disdain, the unspoken question, "Who do you think you are to be here?" "Sir," the pilot said evenly, "you must leave the aircraft. This is not your place." The man exhaled slowly. Inside, everything burned. Each gesture, each phrase dripped with the same familiar mix of prejudice and arrogance he had faced countless times in halls, offices, and restaurants. The cycle repeated endlessly. They always saw in him an intruder, an outsider, anyone but who he truly was. "And what if I refuse?" he asked softly but firmly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The flight attendant froze with her hand still on the phone. The pilot frowned. The steward stepped back, feeling the tension rise. "Then we'll call the police," the woman said coldly. "And believe me, you won't like the consequences." The man glanced out the window. The setting sun gilded the airplane wings on the tarmac. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. His heart beat fast, but with every pulse, his resolve grew stronger. He could have ended it right away, with a single word, a single phrase. But he kept silent. Let them play out this scene to the end. Let them prove for themselves how easily they judged by skin color, by stereotypes, without ever seeking the truth. He stepped forward. "Are you sure you know who you're speaking to?" His voice was quiet, but it silenced the cabin even more than before. The flight attendant swallowed, but tried to keep her composure. "I know enough. You're trespassing." Or, he paused deliberately, "You're mistaken." The captain pressed his lips together, his stare sharp and full of mistrust. "There will be no discussion. You leave now. Final warning." The man looked at them. His eyes held no fear, no anger, only exhaustion and determination. "Very well," he said softly. "Let's see who ends up leaving this plane." And with that, he sat down in the first row seat, arms crossed over his chest. The cabin sank into silence, the kind that foretells an inevitable conflict. The cabin was filled with a tension that could almost be felt physically. The air seemed heavier than usual, and each passing second of silence only amplified the sense of an impending explosion. The flight attendant, clutching the phone in her hand, hesitated. Should she press the button to call security, or wait for the captain's reaction? The steward stood slightly to the side, clearly uncertain about what to do. His eyes showed hesitation, but he was too afraid to contradict his superiors. The man sat calmly, his figure radiating restrained confidence. He seemed to be deliberately demonstrating, "I'm not going anywhere, and your threats won't make me step back." "This is outrageous." The flight attendant was the first to break the silence. "I won't allow strangers to simply take seats in the cabin." Her voice trembled, not only from anger, but also from the fear of losing control of the situation. To her, this man wasn't just the wrong person. He was a threat to order, to rules, to the system in which her word was supposed to be final. "I'm warning you for the last time," the captain said sharply, taking a step forward. "This is a private jet. There is no place here for outsiders. You must leave before things get worse." The man looked at him with a quiet, almost icy smile. "Interesting," he said. "You hand out labels so easily, but it never even occurred to you to ask who I am." The captain snorted. "I've lived long enough to know when someone doesn't belong here." Those words weighed heavily. It was as if they weren't directed at a mere intruder, but at his skin, his face, the very fact of his presence here. The man lifted his chin slightly, but still remained silent about his true position. Inside, the same old pain churned, familiar and bitter. How many times in his life had he heard similar things, in countless variations, from countless people? In restaurants where he was told, "No tables available," even as he saw empty ones. In luxury stores where sales clerks followed him like he was a potential thief. In banks where his questions were ignored until he produced a business card. And now, in his own plane. "We're wasting time," the flight attendant interjected. "If he doesn't leave, I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," the captain agreed. "Let them handle it." The man didn't move. "Do you want a scandal to erupt at the airport?" His voice was quiet, yet carried an edge of threat. "Do you want disgrace across the entire terminal?" "Disgrace?" The flight attendant scoffed. "Disgrace is when people like you push their way into places where they don't belong." Her words struck like a slap. The man felt a surge of anger rise deep within. His fingers curled into a fist, but outwardly he remained as stone. "People like me," he repeated slowly, and in those words was the weight of years lived. The steward took a step forward, trying to ease the situation. "Maybe we should just ask for his documents?" "Why?" The flight attendant cut him off sharply. "It's obvious enough already." But the man still pulled a wallet from his inner pocket, drew out an ID, and placed it on the nearby table. "Ask if that's what you want," he said calmly. The flight attendant glanced briefly, but didn't even pick it up. "Fake," she snapped quickly. "They always forge them." The steward hesitated, unsure what to say. He saw before him a man who carried himself with too much dignity, too much composure to be someone who had simply snuck onto the plane. But his colleague and the captain had already made up their minds, and arguing with them meant putting himself at risk. "Fine," the captain said. "I'll call security myself." He reached for the phone. The man leaned forward, his voice now firm. "Do you really want to take this all the way? Do you want the entire airport to hear how you're throwing me out of my own seat?" Those words made them pause for a moment. They exchanged glances, their eyes full of doubt and irritation. "Your seat?" the flight attendant repeated, her voice dripping with nervous mockery. "You must be joking." "And if I'm not?" he said softly. His eyes gleamed, not with anger, but with resolve. Outside, through the windows, twilight had already settled in. The golden glow of the fading day gave way to the cold lights of the airfield. And with each passing moment, the atmosphere inside the plane grew heavier. The flight attendant gripped the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "I'll call the police anyway," she said. "Let them decide who you are." The man leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. "Let them decide," he said. "But know this. Sometimes the truth comes crashing down suddenly, and when it does, the masks fall." His words sounded like a warning, like the shadow of something great about to happen. And at that very moment, the cabin door opened once again. A man in a business suit entered, an airport representative. He stopped at the threshold, taking in the tense faces and the man seated in the chair. "What's going on here?" he asked. All three crew members turned to him with relief. Finally, someone had arrived to sort it out. But the man in the seat only smiled faintly. "Perfect timing for the truth," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself. The story was only beginning to gather momentum. The cabin had turned into an arena. Every glance, every word charged the space with an invisible spark, ready to burst into flames. The airport representative frowned, slowly stepping closer to the center of the conflict. His suit fit him perfectly. His voice carried a businesslike tone, yet beneath it lay prejudice. He looked at the dark-skinned man the same way the flight attendant and the captain had, with suspicion, as if he was someone who simply didn't belong. "Explain what's going on here," he demanded, addressing the crew rather than the man himself. The flight attendant stepped forward, almost relieved. "This man boarded illegally. We repeatedly asked him to leave, but he refuses. What's more, he behaves defiantly and threatens us." "Threatens?" The man opened his eyes slightly and looked straight at her. "How amusing. I only spoke the truth. Sometimes masks fall, but it seems you are too afraid of what lies behind them." The airport representative shifted his gaze to the captain. "Do you confirm this?" "Absolutely," the captain said curtly. "He persists and refuses to leave the plane." The man sighed. Inside, everything boiled, but outwardly he remained calm. He knew every gesture, every accusation was not just about rules. It was a mirror of the sickness society carried, a sickness called discrimination. "Sir," the airport representative said coldly, "I must ask you to stand up and leave the plane voluntarily. If you refuse, measures will be taken." The words fell like a sentence. The steward, silent until now, grew visibly uneasy. He saw the situation slipping out of control. His eyes flicked to the man, and for a moment, doubt crossed his face. What if they were wrong? But he lacked the courage to voice it. The man rose slowly. His height and bearing instantly shifted the atmosphere. No longer did he look like a lone intruder. He looked like a man certain of his right, a man standing at the threshold of something larger. "You know what's most surprising?" he said, his voice steady, but charged with a restrained storm. "I haven't even had the chance to tell you who I am. Not a single question asked, not one. You needed only one thing, how I look. And that was enough for you to pass judgment." The flight attendant flared up. "This isn't about the color of your skin," she shouted, though even she knew her words rang hollow. "It's about you being here without permission." "Without permission?" The man stepped toward her, and she instinctively backed away. "Did you even ask whether I had it? No. You simply decided that someone like me couldn't possibly belong here." Those words hit harder than any shout. For a second, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the hum of the turbines outside. The airport representative's frown deepened. "Enough. I'm calling security." He reached for the radio on his belt, but the man raised his hand, stopping him with a single gesture. "Do it if you wish, but think carefully what happens when it turns out you made a mistake. Are you ready to bear those consequences?" "What mistake?" the captain snapped. "It's perfectly clear." The man fixed him with a long, heavy stare. Sometimes the only thing that's clear is that someone is too afraid to admit they're wrong. The flight attendant threw back her head. "Enough! Get him out of here." Politeness was gone from her tone. What remained was anger, almost hatred, born not of logic, but of the refusal to accept another's right to be equal. The man smiled faintly. That's your truth. To shout, to press, to threaten, because you have no other weapon. His calm only infuriated them more. Rage flickered in the captain's eyes as he stepped closer. One more word, and you'll be dragged out by force. By force? The man shook his head slowly. For centuries, your force has been used to humiliate those who looked different. How many lives did that force crush, stealing away voices, dignity, respect? But force never made you right. The steward, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke quietly. Maybe we should. Just check his documents, just to be sure. I already told you, the flight attendant snapped. It's a fake. Or maybe it isn't, the man added calmly, sitting back down. Maybe that's exactly why you're afraid to look too closely. The airport representative frowned deeper. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But he brushed it away quickly, as though frightened of the thought itself. Stop wasting time, he said. Security is already on its way. The man leaned back, eyes closing. He felt the fury boiling in his chest, but he no longer wished to hold back the truth much longer. They themselves were pushing him toward the moment when everything would become clear. Very well, he said quietly. Let them come. But then the whole world will see who you really are. Outside, footsteps echoed. Heavy boots thudded down the corridor. Security was approaching. The flight attendant smiled with relief. The captain scowled. The airport representative straightened, as if bracing for triumph. But the man sat calmly, his face a mask of steel. He knew. The climax was near, and what would follow was far greater than a simple quarrel. They didn't yet realize how deeply mistaken they were. But the moment of truth was already at the door, and as security stepped into the cabin, the tension reached its breaking point. Every breath, every glance fused into one single point, where past and present collided head-on. The world held its breath, waiting for the truth to be revealed. The heavy footsteps of security filled the cabin. Two burly men in uniform stepped inside, their eyes immediately fixing on the man pointed out to them as the intruder. The dark-skinned man sat motionless in the chair, as though rooted to it, and only the corners of his lips twitched in a barely visible smile. There he is, the flight attendant said at once, her voice triumphant. He refused to leave the aircraft, was rude, and made threats. The guards exchanged glances. One of them, older and sterner, took a step forward. Sir, you need to leave immediately. This is a direct order from airport administration. The man opened his eyes, staring straight at him. And what if I refuse? The guard frowned. Then we'll have to remove you by force. The captain and flight attendant exchanged glances. A mix of relief and malice flashed in their eyes. To them, the matter was settled. The outsider would soon be thrown out. Order would be restored. But the man didn't move. His composure unnerved them all more than shouting or resistance ever could. How interesting, he said quietly. How quickly you reach for force against a man you haven't even tried to listen to. Enough, the flight attendant snapped. You're a trespasser, and that's final. Trespasser? The man shook his head slowly. No, the true trespassers are those who presume to judge others without knowing their story. The senior guard's frown deepened. Sir, I don't want to use force against you, but if you don't leave the plane right now, I'll be obliged to do so. The man rose. His height, his confidence, his upright posture instantly made the guards tense. He stepped closer, meeting their gaze directly. How many times in history have people like me been told, "You don't belong here"? How many times were they driven out of schools, restaurants, even the homes they'd lived in for generations? And always it came with the same look I see on your faces now, that mixture of disdain and false certainty. The guards exchanged glances. Their training urged them to act swiftly and decisively, but the man's words made them hesitate. "Sir," the younger guard spoke again, his voice less steady now. "I'm just following orders." "Orders," the man echoed with an ironic smile. "Always orders. Always someone above giving the command and someone below obeying without question. That's how discrimination thrives. No one takes responsibility. They all hide behind the words, 'I was just following orders.'" The captain clenched his fists. "Enough philosophy," he barked. "Get him out of here." The flight attendant stood beside him, her face lit with malicious satisfaction. Her voice trembled with excitement. "Yes, it's time to end this charade." The man turned his eyes on her. They flashed with steel. "A charade," he repeated. "This charade is of your making. You decided I was a fraud, a criminal, an intruder, simply because I look different. And now you want to prove to yourselves you were right." He stepped toward her, and she instinctively shrank back, despite being surrounded by security. "But you know what's most frightening?" His voice dropped lower, making it all the more powerful. "You don't even allow yourselves to consider you might be wrong. It's easier to call the police, bring guards, use force, than to admit your judgment might be biased." The senior guard looked at the captain, then at the airport representative. "Are you sure he isn't a passenger?" he asked cautiously. "Passenger?" The flight attendant laughed, her laughter dripping with contempt. "Look at him. Do you seriously think people like him could be passengers on this jet?" The words rang out sharply, like a blow to the air itself. Even the younger guard winced, his face twisting as he turned to his colleague with doubt in his eyes. The man sighed. His heart pounded, but he kept control. "There it is," he said softly. "The truth you've been holding back, finally spoken aloud." The captain scowled but didn't have time to respond. The cabin door opened once more. 2 more airport staff entered, followed by the company's flight manager. He surveyed the scene, the guards, the fiery-eyed flight attendant, the angry captain, and the man standing tall in the aisle. "Explain," he demanded. The flight attendant rushed to speak first. "This man boarded illegally. He refuses to leave. He's disruptive. He's delaying departure." "And making threats," the captain added. The manager's gaze moved to the man. He stood calm, steady, his eyes filled not with fear or humiliation, but with resolve. "Threats?" he repeated slowly. "I only said the truth always comes to light. Is that a threat?" The manager frowned. He sensed the situation was not so simple, but held back from taking sides. "I'll call the police anyway," the flight attendant said stubbornly. "Let them check his identity." The man allowed himself a faint smile. "Excellent. Let them. Then you'll all see who's been wrong." The guards hesitated, waiting for an order. The tension was at its breaking point. Just a little more, and a scandal would erupt across the entire airport. The man lowered himself back into the chair, folding his arms. "I'll wait," he said. "Amazing how quickly you're willing to destroy your own reputation just to preserve the illusion of being right." His voice was calm, but it carried a force that unsettled many in the room. Even the captain, who seemed ready to explode at any second, fell silent. And in that silence, it was clear. The conflict had reached its peak. Everything teetered on the edge, and the truth was close at hand. But the man still held it back, leaving the others trapped in their own prejudice. The cabin sank once more into suffocating silence. Outside, the lights of the airfield flickered, while inside, a storm brewed. The man sat in the first-row seat. Security stood nearby. The crew exchanged glances, and the airport representative pressed his lips tight. Everything was frozen on the edge, as if a single spark could ignite a scandal. Slowly, the man rose. His gaze was heavy, yet calm. He looked at each of them in turn, as if weighing them one by one. Only then did he speak. "Very well. You want the truth? Then hear it." His voice rang firm, and even the guards involuntarily stilled. "This aircraft belongs to me." The words thundered in the air like a clap of lightning. The flight attendant burst into laughter, nervous, mocking. "Yours?" she repeated with derision. "Are you serious? Is this some kind of joke?" The captain frowned, though the same sneer flickered in his eyes. "Enough! This is absurd." "It's not absurd," the man replied, standing tall, his voice calm, but each phrase striking like a hammer. "I am the owner of this plane. You've spent hours arguing with me, humiliating me, accusing me of trespassing. But you, not I, are the guests here. You, not me." The senior guard exchanged a glance with his partner. "Sir, if this is a joke, it's a poor one." The man looked at him with cold weariness. "For you, anything that doesn't fit your familiar picture of the world is a joke." The flight attendant snapped again. "Prove it!" she shouted. "Do you have any papers, contracts, documents?" The man took out his wallet, withdrew a leather folder and placed it on the table. "Here are the registration papers, ownership documents." She didn't move, only crossed her arms. "Forgery. Just another fancy forgery. Do you think we're that naive?" The captain stepped forward, picked up the papers, skimmed them, then returned them at once. "This proves nothing. Papers can be printed anywhere." The airport representative took them more carefully, studying them with greater attention. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. But the flight attendant cut in before he could dwell on it. "Are you really going to believe this man? Look at him. Does he look like the owner of a private jet?" Her words rang too sharply, and silence fell like a stone. Even the guards averted their eyes. In her voice, what had been cloaked in rules and duties was laid bare, raw prejudice. The man gave a quiet, bitter smile. "There it is. You don't even try to deny it. For you, the only argument is the colour of my skin. Not documents, not facts, not reality. Just the picture you prefer, where someone like me can't possibly be the owner." The airport representative flushed, but said nothing. He seemed caught between the clarity of the man's words and the pressure of the crew. The guards shifted uneasily. The senior muttered, "We need confirmation from the database." "An excellent idea," the man said calmly. "Call the office, let them check." But the flight attendant dismissed the suggestion with a sharp gesture. "A waste of time. He's just stalling." The captain backed her up. "Exactly. It's obvious he's lying. The real owner wouldn't even speak to us. He'd have escorts, managers, documents prepared in advance, and this man, he's just playing a role." The man fixed him with a long stare. "Easier that way, isn't it? To deny the obvious, because to accept my truth would mean admitting your guilt." "Guilt?" The captain laughed. "That's ridiculous." But the laugh was nervous. "Yes, guilt," the man said firmly. "Guilt not only for being wrong, but for humiliating, for insulting, for daring to judge me simply because I don't look the part." He paused, his voice dropping lower, but carrying even greater weight. "I look like a human being. That should be enough." The guards froze. The younger stared at the floor, ashamed. The senior hesitated. The airport representative flipped the papers nervously, desperate for a way out. The flight attendant finally broke the silence. "This is all theatre," she shouted. "He's a fraud, and we should drag him out." But her voice no longer held confidence, only a desperate attempt to drown out her own doubts. The man sat back down, folded his arms, and said, "Call the police, call security, call whomever you like. But the truth will come out. And then the only question will be, who ends up looking like a fool?" His calmness was more terrifying than shouting. It drained his opponents of strength. They felt the ground slipping beneath their feet. And still, none of them dared to admit the truth. They clung to their wall of distrust and prejudice. Outside, footsteps echoed again. New arrivals. The police were indeed approaching. Their arrival was supposed to be the end. But the man knew. The end would be the beginning of something louder. A story that would expose every single one of those who judged him by the color of his skin instead of the truth. The cabin sank into tense anticipation. Beyond the door, new footsteps echoed, heavy, deliberate. Two uniformed police officers entered. Their faces were stern yet neutral. Men accustomed to witnessing every kind of conflict. "What's going on here?" the senior officer asked, scanning the group. The flight attendant stepped forward first. Her voice trembled, though she tried to sound confident. "This man boarded a private jet illegally. He refuses to leave, produced suspicious documents, and claims to be the owner." The officers turned their gaze to the man. He sat calmly, eyes steady. "Is that true?" one of them asked. "The truth," the man answered slowly, "is that this jet does indeed belong to me, but these people refuse to accept the obvious." The captain stepped forward. "Officers, don't be fooled. He has nothing to do with this aircraft. He's just stalling for time." The flight attendant added sharply, "Look at him. Does he look like someone who owns a jet like this?" The officers exchanged glances. A flicker of doubt passed between them. The senior officer pulled out a tablet connected to the central database. "Let's see the documents." The man produced his folder and handed it over. The officer began the check. Silence gripped the cabin. All eyes fixed on the tablet, waiting for the verdict. The flight attendant whispered under her breath, unable to bear the suspense. "A forgery. It has to be a forgery." The captain pressed his lips together, clearly unraveling. The airport representative stood off to the side, pale, sensing matters had spun beyond control. The officer looked up from the screen. "Interesting," he said. "The database confirms an owner with these credentials." The cabin erupted. "Impossible!" the flight attendant shouted. "You've made a mistake." "Check again," demanded the captain. "Things like this can be faked." The officer frowned. "Airport databases are not faked, Captain." But the man did not gloat. He only gave a weary smile. "See? Even now, with facts before you, you refuse to accept the truth." "Because it's absurd," the flight attendant nearly screamed. "People like him don't belong here." The words fell like a slap across the air. Even the guards turned their eyes away, ashamed to hear them. The younger dropped his gaze to the floor. The officer fixed the flight attendant with a sharp look. "People like him? What exactly do you mean by that?" She faltered, but it was too late. Everyone understood. The man rose from his seat, his voice steady and resonant. "That's how discrimination works. First, they tell you, you don't belong here. Then they add, you don't look like someone who could be the owner. And when facts prove otherwise, they shout, it can't be true." He paused, sweeping his eyes over the cabin. "And do you know what's most terrifying? It isn't a mistake. It's a system trained to reject us." The airport representative flushed, but said nothing. He had no defense left. The officers exchanged a glance. The senior nodded, returning the documents. "They're authentic." The man took the folder back, sat once more, and said calmly, "Now you see who the real trespassers are." The captain bristled. "This is impossible." "Impossible." The man met his eyes. "What's impossible is admitting your guilt." The flight attendant stood pale, her hands trembling. Anger still flickered in her gaze, but fear was rising above it. I was only doing my job," she muttered. The man shook his head. "No, you were doing prejudice. You carried out a sentence before I ever spoke a word." Silence fell again. Even the police said nothing. The truth had broken free. But none of those who accused him wanted to admit defeat. And the man knew. This was not the end. There would be another conversation. A conversation where he would need not only papers, but strength. Because in their eyes, he was still a stranger. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning to reveal the deepest truth, the one long hidden behind the mask of rules and duties. The company's leadership arrived quickly. Behind the police officers, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit stepped into the cabin, carrying the expression of someone who already knew he would have to handle an unpleasant scandal. A woman lawyer followed him, tablet in hand, her gaze sharp and cold. The cabin froze. The flight attendant and captain straightened, trying to appear composed. The guards stepped aside. The police moved back a pace, making way for the new figures. The dark-skinned man sat still, his face a mask, though his eyes betrayed both exhaustion and the deep pain built up over many years. "What is happening here?" the suited man asked dryly, sweeping his eyes across the room. The flight attendant spoke first, hurriedly, almost defensively. "This man, he boarded the jet illegally. He claimed it was his, but we were certain he was a fraud. We acted according to protocol." The captain followed quickly. "Yes, we had a duty to protect the aircraft and the crew. We couldn't simply take a stranger at his word." The company manager slowly turned his gaze to the man. "You claim this jet is yours?" The man rose from his seat, facing them all. "I don't claim. I state a fact." The lawyer stepped forward, took the documents from the officer's hand, and leafed through them quickly. For several minutes, the cabin was silent except for the rustle of paper and the sharp click of her heels on the carpet. At last, she lifted her eyes. "They're authentic. The documents are genuine. This aircraft does indeed belong to him." The words struck like thunder. The flight attendant went pale. The captain froze, his lips twitching. The airport representative stepped back as if wishing to vanish. "But," the flight attendant began, her voice shaking, "that's impossible. He can't be the owner." The lawyer arched her brow. "Can't? Why not?" The flight attendant swallowed. "Because, just look at him." The words escaped too bluntly. Even the captain turned sharply toward her, as if to silence her. But it was too late. The company manager's frown deepened. His voice chilled. "Are you saying you judged whether a man could own property based on his appearance?" She pressed her hands to her uniform, as if to hide them. The man gave a quiet, bitter smile. "There it is. The truth. No masks, no excuses. Look at him. For them, that alone was enough to humiliate, to accuse, to cast me out." The manager sighed heavily. "This is serious. Very serious." The captain tried to seize the moment. "Wait. We only wanted to protect the aircraft. We didn't know. We couldn't have known he was the owner." The man turned toward him. "And did you try to find out? Did you ask even a single question? Did you let me speak? No. You decided who I was instantly. You passed judgment without trial." The captain fell silent, his face flushing with heat. The lawyer stepped forward. "The crew's actions display clear signs of discrimination. We are obliged to record this officially." The flight attendant flared. "That's unfair. I was just following procedure." "In no procedure," the lawyer replied coldly. "Is it written? Judge a man by the color of his skin." The cabin fell into silence again. The manager turned to the man and bowed his head respectfully. "I apologize on behalf of the company. Believe me, we will take action." "Apologies are words," the man replied. His voice was steady but carried weariness. "Words don't erase what happened. They humiliated me in my own plane. They shouted that I don't look like an owner. That's not just a mistake. That's a wound I know too well." The manager lowered his eyes. "We understand, and we will act." The lawyer added, "The crew will be suspended pending investigation." The flight attendant cried out, "What?" "But I was only doing my duty." The man looked at her and spoke quietly. "Your duty is to respect a person. You chose to demean." She dropped her eyes. The captain exhaled heavily. Anger and helplessness twisted across his face. He wanted to argue, but knew it was useless. The man sat down again, leaning on the armrests. "I don't want revenge. I want justice. I want you to understand. People like me shouldn't have to prove every day that we deserve to be where we already belong by right." His words hung in the air like a lesson. The manager nodded. "We'll take it to heart." But the man knew. Whether they truly would was a matter of time. Prejudice lay too deep in their minds. Outside the windows, the airfield lights blinked. The jet was preparing for departure. But inside, silence reigned, filled with the echo of words that could not be unsaid. The conflict was officially resolved, but the true struggle had only begun. For the wounded pride of the crew and their refusal to accept their mistakes promised new clashes ahead. And the man understood. This night was no ending. It was only a comma in his long fight against discrimination. Word of the incident spread faster than anyone expected. First, whispers ran through the narrow corridors of the airport. Someone had seen police enter a private jet. Someone else had heard shouting. Then the information leaked to the press office. Journalists were already asking questions. The company realized there would be no way to silence this story. The dark-skinned man sat in his chair, silent, gazing out the window. He needed no cameras, no grand statements, no dramatic speeches. But he knew this was now bigger than a personal insult. This was about justice. The company manager led the crew into a separate room for review. The police remained on board as witnesses. The lawyer activated her tablet, recording every word. "Explain yourselves," the manager said coldly, looking at the captain and the flight attendant. The captain stood straight, though the confidence in his posture was gone. "We acted according to protocol. A stranger entered the jet, and we had no confirmation of his identity. We were obliged to stop him." "But you heard the findings of the police and the lawyer," the airport representative interjected, still visibly uncomfortable. "The documents were authentic." "It could have been an excellent forgery," the captain insisted stubbornly. "I am responsible for the safety of this jet and could not take that risk." The manager turned to the flight attendant. "And you?" She flushed, speaking quickly, almost incoherently. I was only doing my job. I saw he looked suspicious. He didn't look like a client." "Didn't look like?" The lawyer cut in sharply, her voice slicing through the air. "Do you understand that this phrase is the key to the entire conflict?" The flight attendant fell silent, her breathing heavy. "You never asked who he was," the lawyer continued. "You didn't clarify. You didn't give him the chance to explain. From the start, you decided he was a fraud. Why?" The flight attendant turned her eyes away, but the words spilled from her lips. "Because owners are usually different." The room froze. Everyone understood what she had said. Even the captain dropped his gaze, realizing her admission sounded like a sentence. The manager rubbed his face wearily. "Do you realize the damage to the company's reputation? This story has already leaked. Journalists are demanding a statement." "Then say it was a mistake," the flight attendant nearly shouted. "Say he misrepresented himself, that it was a misunderstanding." "Mistake?" The lawyer shook her head. "This was no mistake. This was systemic discrimination. Denying it will sink this company completely." The captain scowled. "So we're just to be sacrificed?" "No," the lawyer said firmly. "You made that choice yourselves when you judged a man by his appearance." Footsteps sounded outside. The man himself entered. His presence filled the room with silence. He didn't shout, didn't show rage. His calm was more frightening than any accusation. "You're discussing what to do with me," he asked quietly. "No, you should be discussing what to do with yourselves." The flight attendant dropped her gaze, but her fists clenched as if holding on to the last fragments of defiance. I didn't mean to offend." "But you did," the man said firmly, "and not just me. You offended everyone who's ever heard the same look in someone's eyes. You don't look like you belong here." He stepped closer. "I built my business all my life. I fought for every opportunity. I bought this jet not to be told by my own staff that I don't look the part." The captain tried to protest. "We didn't know." "Is that an excuse?" The man cut him off. "If I had been white, in an expensive suit, with a familiar name from your client lists, you would have asked for my documents, but you would not have shouted, 'Leave the premises.'" The captain lowered his head. The company manager exhaled heavily. "We are forced to take action." The lawyer opened her tablet. According to company policy, Such acts of discrimination are punished severely. The crew will be suspended pending further review by the board of directors. The flight attendant turned pale. This isn't fair. I'll lose my job over one mistake. The man looked at her steadily. This wasn't one mistake. It was your entire way of seeing the world. And until you admit that, these mistakes will keep happening again and again. Silence weighed down the room. The board will meet tomorrow, the manager said. But it's already clear. The consequences will be severe. The company cannot afford accusations of racism. The flight attendant covered her face with her hands, tears spilling. But tears could not erase her words, nor undo what had happened. The man turned and walked toward the exit. I'm not seeking revenge, he said, pausing at the door. But I will see justice, so that no one ever again feels like a stranger in their own home. He left, and silence closed in behind him. The captain sank heavily into a chair. The flight attendant wept quietly into her hands. The lawyer continued recording every word. The manager stared out the window, knowing that tomorrow would be a trial for the company, one that could decide its very reputation. Meanwhile, the dark-skinned man strode down the corridor, his footsteps steady. He knew the fight wasn't over, but now it would not be only for himself. It would be for everyone who had been forced to hear the same words. You don't look like you belong here. The board of directors convened the next morning. The vast conference hall on the top floor of the company's headquarters was flooded with light. Around the long table sat the directors, men and women in tailored suits, each with a tablet, documents, and their own opinion to deliver. The atmosphere was tense. Outside the building, journalists were already gathering, TV cameras capturing every detail. At the center of the table, facing the large screens, sat the owner of the jet, the very man who had been humiliated the day before in his own property. He looked composed. His eyes carried no rage and no triumph, only cold resolve. The chairman opened the session. We are gathered here to address an emergency threatening our company's reputation. Yesterday, an incident occurred on board a private jet. The details are known. The owner of the jet was mistaken by the crew for an intruder. Police and airport authorities became involved. The situation has gone public. The lawyer who had been present on board stood and played the recording. In silence, the voices of the flight attendant, the captain, and security filled the room. He's here illegally. He's a fraud. Look at him. The words echoed off the walls, making the director's expressions grow darker. When the recording ended, silence fell. This is a direct case of racial discrimination, the lawyer said firmly. We cannot deny it. A director cleared his throat, but the crew insists they acted by procedure. Procedure doesn't instruct you to say, look at him, the owner cut in. His voice was calm, but steel rang in it. Procedure doesn't teach you to expel a man without letting him speak. That isn't procedure, that is prejudice. Several directors nodded gravely. The reputational risk is enormous, the CFO remarked. Headlines are already spreading. Jet owner expelled by crew. If we don't respond decisively, it will devastate our business. We need an official statement, suggested another, with acknowledgement of the mistake, an apology, and clear measures. But the measures must be concrete, the lawyer added. Words alone won't suffice. The chairman turned to the owner. What do you want yourself? The man lifted his eyes. Each word came slow, deliberate, weighed like iron. I don't want revenge. I don't want to ruin anyone's career for satisfaction, but I want justice. Not only for myself, but for everyone who faces what I faced. He paused. You must prove that discrimination has no place in this company. Not with words, with action. The crew who humiliated me must be suspended. And more than that, you must implement mandatory training for all employees so they understand that every person deserves respect, regardless of appearance. Murmurs spread through the hall. That would be expensive, one director ventured. More expensive will be losing trust, the CFO snapped. We'll lose clients, partners, and contracts if this story is seen as our stance. The owner spoke again. Money can be earned again. Reputation cannot. The words hung in the air. The chairman nodded. I agree. We must act decisively. I propose 3 measures. First, suspension of the flight attendant and captain, pending review of their professional suitability. Second, an official public apology to the owner. Third, the launch of mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. A brief discussion followed, voices for and against. But the outcome was clear. The majority supported the plan. At that moment, the flight attendant and captain were brought in. They stood before the board like defendants in court. Their faces were tight with tension. The flight attendant looked pale, her eyes swollen from tears. Do you understand the seriousness of this situation? The chairman asked. I was just doing my job, she muttered. I never meant to offend. But you did, the owner cut her off sharply, because you judged skin, not facts. The captain clenched his fists. We couldn't have known. You didn't want to know, the man replied, and that is your guilt. The chairman delivered the verdict. From this moment, you're suspended. Your actions will be reviewed by a commission. This decision is final. The flight attendant buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling. The captain stood rigid, his eyes burning with powerless defiance. The session ended. In the corridors, journalists were waiting. Within half an hour, the company's press office released a statement. We acknowledge our fault. Our client was subjected to unacceptable treatment aboard his own jet. The company offers an official apology and is taking steps to ensure this never happens again. The man read the statement and knew. This was only the beginning. Yes, they had acknowledged him. Yes, they had apologized. But beyond these walls remained thousands of stories like his, where people stayed silent because they had no private jet, no voice the media would hear. He rose, thanked the board, and said quietly, Truth is not in what you say. Truth is in what you do next. Then he left the hall, leaving the directors in a silence heavy with realization. The story spread beyond the company almost instantly. By evening, every major news outlet was running it under bold headlines. Jet owner expelled by crew, mistaken for an intruder. Racial bias in the sky. Private flight turns into scandal. When skin color matters more than documents, airport incident. TV screens showed images from the airport. Police boarding the jet. Anxious company staff. Reporters with microphones. And all emphasized one thing. The owner of the aircraft had been treated as a stranger, even though every piece of evidence proved otherwise. On social media, the story went viral like wildfire. Some users posted furious comments. This is unacceptable. How can this still happen in the 21st century? Others shared personal memories. I was stopped in a store for no reason too. They looked at me like I was a thief. The hashtags in my own jet and doesn't look like an owner shot into the trending lists. People made memes, sketches, and short videos. At the same time, debates flared. A few tried to defend the crew, saying they were just doing their job. But those voices were quickly drowned out. Journalists hounded the flight attendant and captain outside their homes. Reporters shouted questions in the street. Do you consider your actions discriminatory? Why did you decide he was an intruder? Did you really say he doesn't look like an owner? Their silence and evasions only fueled the fire. Meanwhile, the company came under crushing pressure. The board was forced to issue another statement. At a press conference, the manager announced, We recognize the seriousness of this incident. Our client and partner was subjected to unacceptable treatment. We have already begun an internal investigation, and the crew has been suspended. Furthermore, the company is launching a broad program to combat discrimination. Journalists immediately pressed further. But how did you allow this to happen at all? How do you vet your employees? Do you really believe apologies are enough? The answers were cautious, but it was clear. The company's reputation hung in the balance. At the same time, the man himself, the jet's owner, became the center of attention. Journalists scrambled for interviews. He spoke little, avoided sensational statements. But at one event, he delivered a line that spread across the globe. "I can defend myself because I have money, status, a voice. But what about those who don't? How many people are pushed out of stores, restaurants, and offices every day simply because they don't look the part?" That phrase was quoted everywhere. Protests flared in several cities. Small rallies against discrimination. Online, people shared their own stories. Being denied entry to clubs because of the dress code. Being told in job interviews, "You wouldn't fit with our team." The scandal had become a symbol of something far greater. Politicians seized on the issue, calling for new laws against hidden discrimination. Civil rights groups pushed for an industry-wide investigation into aviation. How often did crews let bias shape their judgment? To salvage its image, the company announced the creation of a fund to support victims of discrimination. Advertisements proclaimed, "We've learned our lesson." But the public was slow to believe. Meanwhile, the man received letters and calls from strangers. "Thank you for not staying silent. Why, you've shown that even the wealthy face what we go through. Your story is our story." But instead of joy, he felt a deep ache. Every message reminded him the problem was far bigger than one plane. One evening, sitting in his study, he scrolled through headlines on his tablet. His name, his jet, his ordeal, all were being dissected. Yet his mind circled a single question. What now? How do I make sure this changes not just a company, but people's minds? The phone rang. It was the company's manager. "We're convening the board again," he said. "We need to decide the next steps. The media demands your comment." The man closed his eyes. "Very well, but my comment won't be for you. It will be for those who are told every day they don't look the part." The next day, he would face a hall packed with cameras and microphones. Journalists poised to record every word. The company hoped he would soften the blow. But he had no intention of speaking for the company. He would speak for the truth. And society held its breath, waiting. The conference hall was packed to the brim. Cameras formed a solid wall, lenses following every movement, recorders buzzing like bees. At the table stood the man, the jet owner at the center of the scandal. The company's leadership stood behind him, but at that moment, they were nothing more than a backdrop. All attention was on him. He stepped forward, took the microphone in his hand. For a moment, silence descended. The hall held its breath. "Yesterday, I was asked to leave my own jet," he began calmly. "I was told I couldn't be there, that I didn't look like an owner." The words struck like a blow. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed, but no one interrupted. "I am a wealthy man," he continued. "I have businesses, resources, lawyers, and the means to defend myself. But," he paused, "even with all of this, I faced what millions experience every single day." His gaze swept the room, his eyes steady, his voice quieter now, which only made it stronger. "We are judged not by our actions, not by our words, not by our achievements. We are judged by our skin, by our appearance, by stereotypes. And it hurts. Not only me, but everyone who has heard, again and again, 'You don't belong here.' The silence was so deep that when someone dropped a pen, it rang out across the room. "I could have forgiven it as a mistake," he said. But it was no mistake. It was a system of thought where a person is first a suspect and only then a human being. He drew a deep breath. "I didn't come here for pity. I came for justice." The company's executives shifted uneasily. They had expected talk of compensation, apologies, settlements, but his words cut far deeper. "I want this story to be a lesson. For companies, stores, schools, restaurants, for all of us to stop judging people by appearance, for everyone to be given a chance to be heard. Because everyone has the right to respect." He took a step back, then raised the microphone once more. "Today, I am a jet owner. Yesterday, to them, I was an intruder. Tomorrow, it could happen to any one of you. Think about that. The hall fell silent. Then, applause. At first hesitant, then swelling louder and louder. Journalists rose to their feet, cameras capturing his face, a face lined with exhaustion, but firm with resolve. The company chairman tried to speak. We extend our official apologies and pledge. But the audience no longer listened to him. Their eyes were on the man alone. In his words, they had heard not a private dispute, but something far greater. Within the hour, social media exploded with new quotes. Yesterday, I was an intruder in my own home. We are judged not by our deeds, but by our skin. Everyone has the right to respect. The story had become symbolic. People shared clips, wrote posts, dissected his speech on broadcasts. Politicians and activists called for this moment to be the beginning of real change. That evening, the man returned home. He removed his jacket, sank into a chair, weary. His phone buzzed endlessly. Journalists, partners, strangers wanting to thank him. But he set it aside. He needed no triumph. He felt no victory. He felt responsibility. He walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, his jet stood, once only a symbol of freedom and power. Now, it was also a symbol of struggle. I've taken the first step, he thought, but the rest we must take together. He knew tomorrow the noise would fade. Newspapers would print new headlines, but the words spoken today would remain. And perhaps they would help someone in the moment they are told, "You don't belong here." For the first time in days, he smiled. A small, almost invisible smile. Because despite all the pain, he felt, today, a new story had begun. A story where truth had found a voice. And that voice could never again be silenced. The end.